You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to the show, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. We're at another landmark. This is episode number 75, so we're 3/4 of the way to 100 episodes. This week's guest is a true inspiration. Her name is Anna Huthmaker, and a story about hiking is great enough, but it is what she has done since she was introduced to hiking that speaks to the transformative nature of being in the woods for a very long time. Anna will be along soon. While I remember, because some of you know what the memory can be like when you're 65, I wanted to let you all know that Bruce Matson, our victim this year on our other show, Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail Dream, will be hitting the trail this weekend. I know that many of you already listened to the show, but some of you decided, not unreasonably, that the last thing you wanted to do was to listen to a couple of old geezers talking about what one of them was going to be doing this year. Well, the preparations are over, his bag is packed, and for this coming Monday's show, I'll be chatting with Bruce from the top of Springer with his wife, Cheryl. The talking about doing it has stopped and actually doing it has begun. Come and join us if you've stayed on the sidelines. We got a great section of the show with Tavares talking about the Vermont Long Trail. I must say this is a trail I kind of harboured ambitions to hike at some stage, but listening to Curtis, it seems that it gets tougher the further north it goes, and I'm not sure that my whole body will be able to take it. But before we go any further, I fancy a spot of lunch, don't you? How about those days when you've struggled through the morning, probably got 10 miles under your belt, and breakfast is a distant memory? It's lunchtime, and yep, you could always have your full Snickers of the day for yet another sugar rush. But sitting there in an empty shelter protected from the bitter wind, I'm sure you'd really rather have Trailtopia's beef-flavoured ramen noodles with green beans, corn and mushrooms. Tea-flippin'-licious. And if you need to go without the gluten, all of Trailtopia's ramen noodle lunches and light dinners are available gluten-free. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. And I'm back again. I've been looking forward to speaking with this week's guest, Anna Huthmaker, for some time now, ever since, in fact, that one of our previous guests, Jan Lightshoe, told us about Anna's dance of the real woman. Let's face it, you've got to meet the inventor of the dance of the real woman, haven't you? To be honest, I wasn't expecting that she would be such a force of nature. Here is Anna Huthmaker. Right, I would like to introduce a lady who I was introduced to by Jan Lightshoe, one of our previous guests. Her name is Anna Huthmaker. Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And Jan told me about, in her interview, she told me about the dance of the real woman, and I was naturally intrigued. So before we get into it, what precisely is the dance of the real woman? From the person who invented it, apparently.
Yeah, the dance of the real woman technically is a celebration of just kind of overcoming something. But it happened, a couple of friends took me up on San Luis Mesa, which is outside of Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico. And I don't know if you've ever climbed a mesa, but mesas, no. I don't think they're really meant to be climbed. They're straight up the side, at least it seems like to me. And we climbed up, and it got steeper and steeper. And I got to the point where the top of the mesa was like literally at my eye level. But I was stuck. I was on this little tiny rock, and I couldn't go any further. And I couldn't get up, and I kind of froze. And my friends worked, and they kind of circled around me, and one of my friends climbed up on the top, and my friend Johnny said, "Okay, Anna," he says, "I'm going to put my foot here against this straight wall, and you're going to step on it." And he said, "And I'm going to push, and she's going to pull, and we're going to get you on the top of this mesa." And so he counted to 3, and I trusted him blindly, and because I knew I was going to plummet to my death. And so they counted to 3, and he pushed and she pulled, and I closed my eyes, and all of a sudden I was on top of this mesa, and I jumped up on my feet, and I started turning around in circles and waving my arms. And I started going, I'm a real woman. I'm a real woman. And they just laughed and laughed at me. And that was the dance of the real woman. And anytime I'm with people and we do something and we get to the top of something, I go, okay, we have to do the dance of the real woman. And we do it. And we swing our poles around and we dance.
I'm sure the observers will think dance of the crazy woman, but
well, yeah, probably.
I can understand that.
I think they were kind of expecting me to burst into tears because, I was kind of freaked out and everything. But no, once I was up there, I was just so happy.
That's a nice idea, actually, to celebrate. It's a physical celebration of something that's a physical challenge in the first place, isn't it? So that's kind of nice.
It is, and I think that's so important. I think that we all need to celebrate when you overcome something physical or something mental, because in my case, it was both. And even like to somebody else, it was probably a really tiny thing, but to me, it was important. And so I think that we shouldn't let life go by without celebrating all those little things.
Darn right. I quite agree. And another intriguing thing about you, which I only recently learned, is your trail name. Once more, I simply can't pass by Mudbutt. What on earth and why are you Mudbutt?
Well, I got the name. It's kind of a little self-explanatory. The same friend, my friend John, who took me on Sakawee Mesa, he took me on my very first hike ever up in Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. And it was a beautiful, perfectly dry trail and with one mud puddle. And of course, I found my way into it. So it was only later that evening with a little bit of tequila in his bloodstream that kind of came out and became my trail name. But I have to tell you, the best part about my trail name is when I decided I was going to try and through hike the Appalachian Trail, my mother, who's, a wonderful born and raised Southern woman, she says, Anna, she says, I really want you to consider changing your trail name. She says, Mudbutt. She says, it's just not very ladylike. And I said, well, I said, okay, I'll consider it. And I did. And about a week before I left on my hike attempt, I was doing some trail magic at Woody Gap, and like every single 22-year-old guy that came through, I introduced myself as Mudbutt, and every single one, he went, oh my gosh, that's the coolest name ever. And finally I told Mom, I said, I said, I have to be Mudbutt. It's just who I am.
Yeah, you got to wear it. You got to wear your trail name proudly, especially as you earned it, which is a good.
Absolutely.
Nice. So tell us then, how did you actually get into hiking?
Well, I'm a musician, and I was at Brevard Music Center for the summer, and this friend of mine, John, they were going on a hike, several of them, and he goes, would you like to come? And I was very inactive and unathletic and very overweight, but he was really cute and really nice. And I said, sure, absolutely. And he took me on my very first hike ever. And I just remember kind of loving it. He actually trusted me, and he kind of left me alone because I was slower than everybody. And I kind of fell in love with the woods and the smell of the earth and this feeling that my body was doing this thing that it had never done before. And it just kind of grabbed my heart.
How old were you then, Anna? How old were you then?
I was probably about 23 or 24.
Oh, right. And you'd never been before that at all?
No.
All right.
Yeah, I was a cellist. I spent all my time in a practice room.
Yes, and I wasn't actually going to mention this, but there is a great line one of your students says about the cello. What do they refer to the cello as?
Oh, he says the cello is the bacon of the musical instrument.
You can't get any better than being the bacon of something, can you? Really?
You really can't.
Now, as you've said, and these are your own words that you've used in the past, you are not the archetypal hiker. And you said to me previously that you're not in the PCT crowd. What do you actually mean by that?
Well, in terms of that, so, a lot of these hiker communities, they're really born from geography. And 99% of my hiking has been on the East Coast, and probably 80% of that has been on the Appalachian Trail corridor. And so I know a lot of the people here, people like Light Shoe, people that you've interviewed. I know so many of them, at least by name, if not personally, but I've never even stepped foot on the PCT. And so when I come across like Facebook pages or trail journals, it's like a whole new world. I don't know any of those people, and I haven't had the opportunity to hike over there. I hope to one day.
All right, I see. I couldn't really understand what that meant.
Yeah, that's just a geography thing.
So you got out on the trail when you were 23, and apart from geography, what drew you to the trail itself, the mystical part of the Appalachian Trail, and how did you prepare for it?
Oh gosh. Okay. So in college, at one point, I had a friend, and he came walking by me in the hall one day, and I said, "What are you doing this summer?" "I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail," and I had never heard of it, and that it's that romantic idea of taking a trek, a great journey, and that was literally nothing that was ever part of my possibility for my life. I could not even imagine it, and I spent over a decade just reading books and thinking that the AT was for those people, brave people, capable people. It didn't even occur to me that I could ever be somebody that would attempt it. And finally, it was actually right around New Year's Eve 2000. For some reason, I was reading one of them. I have like every AT book, and I was reading one of them, and I went, maybe I could try this. And I kind of was famous for not following through with stuff and having big ideas but never doing anything. And so I went and asked my parents. We're in a family business, and I held up the book like on January 3rd, and I said, "Do you think I could try this?" And they said, "Well, when would you want to?" And I said, "In 3 years." And they went, "Oh, sure, absolutely," because nobody ever in a million years thought I would actually do it. So, I think the idea was the universe saying it's time, and the universe telling me it was time to start a different path for my life. But it just seemed to come out of the blue.
And so you had the thought in New Year's Eve. By the way, there's a bit of a clue in that. Normally when people on New Year's Eve had a drink, so they make these strange things they're going to do in the future, and they never follow through. Did you carry on preparing from that day forward, or did you just let it drop for a while? Were you always from that time intending to go in 2003?
I was. In my head, that became a reality, and it was going to happen. And now the vast majority of my preparation during that time took place online, and these were the earlier years of listservs and Yahoo groups, where we had these giant Facebook supportive groups and stuff. But I started slowly but surely buying my equipment. I hung out as much as possible at mountain crossings, which a lot of your listeners will know is like the first place you see civilization when you start the Appalachian Trail.
Men get arrested for that sort of thing, hanging around at mountain crossings.
This is true.
It's all right for women.
But those people, I knew the owner and all the staff, and I still do, and they took such good care of me, and they treated me just like any other thru hiker, which was really interesting for me because I didn't feel like one, And I spent better part of 3 years day hiking by myself because I felt like I couldn't keep up with other people. And so that's kind of how I cut my trail teeth, so to speak.
Did that bother you though, Anna, the fact that you couldn't keep up with other people, or were you just happy to be out there, as you said, smelling the earth in the woods?
Well, it only bothered me if I was with other people, and but the truth is that every time I went out by myself, I felt more and more capable and more, better and better about myself. And I wasn't doing, dangerous things. I wasn't going off trail. And I was really, my number one goal ever since I discovered hiking was to never be in one of those stories where they say she had to get rescued and she wasn't prepared. If you had to get rescued, that's fine. But you want them to say she had to get rescued and she was completely ready for it,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I was, even as a complete beginner, I was super prepared, 10 essentials and this. And I always knew if I got stuck out overnight, I could survive and all this stuff. And of course, I always told somebody where I was going. So that made me feel so good about myself personally that I kind of fell in love with hiking by myself. So I never get to do it anymore, but I used to really love it.
So when was the first time that you actually backpacked, stayed overnight prior to the AT? Because you said there were day hikes, didn't you?
Yes, the first time was November. Right. So I left in the spring of 2003. So the November right before that,
Wow.
Dan Light Shoe, from your podcast. She arranged a group of women that we were all on a Yahoo Women's group together. And I didn't know any of those women at all, except for online before we went.
Right.
But we went to Miss Janet's up in Tennessee, in Irwin, Tennessee. And
Irwin,
we did like a 24-mile, 3-day, 2-night kind of a thing that almost killed me and was still one of the most beautiful things I had ever experienced. So,
did that not put you off at all? The fact that it obviously didn't almost kill you, but it obviously gave it was tough. Did you think you could do the AT after you'd finished that?
I don't know. To be honest, even in all my preparing and everything, I could never visualize myself finishing the AT simply because of my speed. I truly didn't think there'd be anything on the trail I couldn't climb. I knew I could go up every mountain as long as I, took my time. But speed wise, I wasn't sure. But that trip, it showed me how much harder it is to carry 30 pounds up a mountain than you realize. It doesn't sound like much. If you're not a backpacker, it doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot. So
it is. It really is. So that was the November, and you started on the AT sometime in March, you say? What date in March?
Yeah, March 31st, April 2nd, somewhere in there. I did a couple of days that I had a gig because I'm a musician. I had to jump off the trail, and then I went back and started again. And so it was right around there.
And I know that you got a bit of an injury early in the trail. What actually happened?
I did. I was hiking. I did that first 100 miles, and I was hiking. I was almost to Franklin, North Carolina, and I broke my foot. I broke it in two places. I knew I had injured myself, but I didn't realize that it was broken. I just knew it hurt a lot. And it just happened to be the exact moment, literally, that my parents showed up out of the blue to do trail magic for us. They put us at a hotel overnight to do more trail magic. And by the next morning, we knew I had to go have it x-rayed. And so, it was not fun at all.
Because you got back on the trail, didn't you? So
I did. So, well, it was one of those things. So I broke it, and I was like, well, this is just going to heal fast. Because when you plan something like a through hike, you've taken off work. I don't know about anybody else. I'd sublet my house. I had so this is like I hate the words once in a lifetime opportunity because I don't believe in that. But this is not something that's easily going to be rescheduled. And so I had to move back into my parents' house. And I just, I told my parents, I'm like, oh, no, this is going to heal. And I'm going back out there. And it took me 3 different doctors to find one that said I could do that. And, the first 2 doctors were like, you're crazy. It's not going to heal in time. And the third doctor, he looked at me, he goes, look, he says, stay off of it. Take all these vitamins, eat a lot of spinach. He says, you go back out. If it breaks again, it breaks again. Then you come back home. And I thought that was a brilliant way to look at it. And he was
That's the kind of doctor you want to find. When you want a doctor to agree with you. So you got back on. How long were you off the trail before you got back on then?
Almost 8 weeks to the day, actually. Wow. I actually spent 6 of those weeks in a wheelchair. I mean, I was like, the doctor was like, absolutely no weight bearing whatsoever. Jeez. And I went a few days early. We went up to Damascus, and I spent some time with my mom day hiking on the Creeper Trail just to see if my foot was going to hold. First with a day pack, and then one day with a backpack. And then finally we were like, okay, let's try. And she dropped me off.
How did it feel on that first day when you first got back onto it with a backpack on as well?
It felt fine. I mean, it hurt a little tiny bit, but I'm one of those people that I tend to just think everything's going to work out all the time. And 99% of the time it does. And so I knew I was going to go back out there. And so, this was a little exercise in caution, but it felt good. I was ready to go back out.
Now, I've avoided saying this since the beginning. And I want people to realise the context of this, but actually I'm going to say it in a second. You tell me how many miles you actually eventually did on the AT that year.
I eventually did 700.
700 miles on the AT, which is a heck of a long way. Let me tell anybody who's ever walked 700 miles a long way. And the reason I've left this to now is just to give some context Anna, when she started hiking the AT, you told me you were just over 5 feet tall, but well over
Hmm.
200 pounds.
Yeah,
And your
264 to be exact.
man, that is well over 200 pounds. Now, your story
Yeah.
tells me that you didn't ever see this sort of imbalance, I guess, as an impediment. What do you have to say to women who are similarly situated and think they can't do this?
Oh, here's the thing about anything in the world, whether it's hiking or writing a book or anything. You can do anything if you take your time. You can do anything if you do a little bit at a time. And, you can climb big, giant mountains one step at a time. And it sounds kind of trite, but in reality, it works. It
Yeah,
totally works. And if you want to get out there and try it, you should never let speed keep you from doing something.
I quite agree.
Because
And I
we,
think that is what puts a lot of people off. They think they can't keep up, but they don't have to keep up, do they? They can just
no,
have a good time and enjoy being out there. And as you say, smelling the earth.
yeah, there's every kind of a way to experience the outdoors out there, and you don't have to fit into somebody else's idea of it. And everyone's idea of it is great. It's just their own idea. So,
Yeah. Now, there are a number of reasons for bringing you on the show, Anna, one of which was to find out what the dance the real woman really was from the lady herself, and of course your name. But I want to talk now about your after trail life, which, to say the very least, has stepped up, hasn't it?
yes, it has.
When you finished your adventure on the AT, how do you think you had changed?
Well, I said once that hiking the Appalachian Trail cracked my heart open,
Yeah.
and really, what I mean for that is it cracked my heart open for myself, because I've always had a giant heart when it comes to other people, and I've always believed that other people can do anything they want, but I
Mm.
never believed that about myself. I had, was really insecure and never, just like I said, I never followed through with things. Well, when I did the AT, my season on the AT, even though I only did 700 miles, and with your audience, I can say those words. When I say those words to my regular friends around here, they always jump on me and they yell at me, "Don't say only 700 miles." But you and I know that we travel in communities where that's just a third of the trail, and I'm surrounded by people that have done the entire trail and two or three giant trails, and so um, even though I didn't do, as much as them, I'm still super proud of what I did. But
You
what it
should
really did
be.
was, oh, I am. I never am cutting myself down when I say that.
Mm.
But I also have a world of respect for everyone that did the entire thing. But when I got off the trail, I can actually remember right before I hit Maine, laying in a hotel room going, wow, you actually have done something here that you never thought you could do. And so when I left the trail, I was like, well, the world is my oyster. What am I going to do now? And I went and spent a month in Africa taking care of orphans. I went into the Arctic Circle to see the Northern Lights. I started traveling, and if I wanted to do something, I thought, now I really believed I could. Like, literally the only thing standing between me and my dreams was getting the time off work and a plane ticket. So, and I have to tell you, one of my proudest moments of my whole life is when I decided I wanted to go to Africa. Because like I said, I'm in a family business, so I approached my parents and I went, could I get a month off and go to Africa? And, would that freak you out? Would that scare you? And my father looked at me, he goes, after the Appalachian Trail, I believe you can do anything. He says, I'm not worried
Oh,
about you at
cool.
all. And my dad's a warrior, so that was big words, So yeah, it completely changed everything.
What is it about the trail you think that changed you, or was it the people, or was it just your achievement? 'Cause or is it just a combination of all these things?
It's a combination of everything, but that that feeling you get when you realize, after I broke my foot and I went back out, I did, I think, 5 days totally solo before
Right,
I
right,
later met up with my original hiking partner,
right.
and and that feeling when you're hiking along and you realize, oh, this is a really pretty spot. I could stop and camp right here if I wanted to, because I have everything I need.
Yeah,
I don't, I can not only survive, but be very comfortable. I have food, I have a tent, or if the sun goes down and you go, golly, this night hiking thing is really nice. I think I just want to keep going. That complete freedom to choose your path, so to speak, no pun intended.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's magical. It really is. When it hit me hard, and it just was magical.
Carrying your whole world on your back rather, is to me is that feeling of total self-sufficiency. Anything you could possibly need is there. There might be a few things you want that you haven't got in your pack, but anything you ever need is right there in your pack, on your back, and wherever you go, it goes. You're carrying your life on your back, aren't you, at that stage?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not about not being responsible to anyone, but it's about 100% being responsible for yourself. And I think that was very important to me, knowing that I actually could make choices for myself that were, healthy and happy, and I could accomplish things. That was an important lesson for me.
All right. Now, you went to Africa, as you say, you traveled a bit, and then you started something which which has grown quite a bit as well. Tell the audience about Trail Dames.
Trail Dames. Trail Dames, I tell people that's my child. I never had it. Trail Dames is my baby. When I was on the Appalachian Trail, I never saw any women that looked like me, and, seeing somebody that was overweight or slower or just, that just did, if it existed, I never saw it. Even in the day hikers, when you would go through parks and stuff. And so when I came off the trail, the idea had to marinate for a while, but I knew that I wanted to start some kind of organization to help women get out there. And I can remember late one night I was sitting up, and I'm not a computer person. Did I mention I'm a musician? Now I am, but back then I didn't know anything at all. And I just started messing around. It was like 3 a.m, and I started messing around, and I found this little Yahoo build a free website thing, and I just started playing with colors, and before I knew it, like, I had this little simple 4-page site called Trail Dames, and I had pictures and I had a story and what we were going to do. And the next day I sent it to several of my friends and said, "What do you think about this?" And my best friend called and she says, "That woman sounds exactly like you." And I said, "That's because that is me." And, my mom looked at it and she went, "I think you're onto something." Now, hindsight's 2020. Had she realized it would have done what it had done, she might have said, "Proceed with a little bit more caution," because I just jumped in and said, "Let's see where this takes us." Yeah. And sure enough, it has grown immensely. We have, I have to tell you, so the first meeting I had, my goal was to have 3 strangers show up, because you can always get your friends to show up, but if you create something, I want strangers, And I had 9 show up. We called them the original 9, and several of them are still with the organization. One of them serves on the board. And
so, how did you organise that first meetup? Was it through Meetup, or was that before Meetup.com?
Oh, this is way before Meetup. Meetup didn't exist.
I thought so.
I actually printed up some flyers. It was kind of old school, and I took them around. Do you remember there was a women, it may still exist, a women's workout place called Curves? And I took them to a Curves, and
I'm probably unlikely to have ever been there, to be fair.
Probably you haven't, no, but it's a great place because it actually takes the kind of women that I was wanting to attract. That Curves did that same thing. It was attracting women that wanted to hang out with other women and get more physical in themselves and learn what they can do, I guess.
So it was genuinely aimed at the, as you referred once before, as the more curvy woman.
Yes. So, because when I named it, I mean, the organization's name is Trail Dames, a hiking club for women of a curvy nature.
And, love it.
Yeah. When I started, I just, I really truly was looking at overweight women, and it wasn't about diet and exercise, because there's a million things that do that. It was about, come climb a mountain, come do the dance of the real woman, see what it feels to actually sweat and breathe heavy and get on top of a mountain. And you did that yourself. Wow. I kind of wanted to show them that feeling, because for me, that feeling was so life-changing. And now, but the interesting thing was the women that came, they did not allow that label to define the organization. Like, we ended up very early on, every single kind of a woman, every shape, every size, every color, every age over 18. It is for adults, and it's fascinating because I still keep that tag on there because the woman, for me, the overweight woman, I just feel like she's got maybe some internal voices that I understand that I had myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, the women all tell me, they're like, no. If this is for beginners and this is about getting out and feeling secure, we all want to come. And they have.
And for the ones who originally came, who were curvy, let's say, how did they, anybody can go to a meeting, can't they? How were they,
Yes.
What were they like when they first got out on the trail? And I presume for some of them, it was their first time ever on a trail, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we always have first time hikers. That's pretty common. But in the beginning we had lots, and they're great. It's so wonderful. I can, oh gosh, like I can't tell you how many women I've seen burst out crying at the top of a mountain because they were just happy, and there's something about, so if you are putting yourself in a physical situation can be really vulnerable if you're not used to it. If you're sweating and you're breathing heavy, you don't want, a lot of times you don't want the people around you to know that going uphill is hard. Well, I got news for everybody. Going uphill's hard. It just is,
Yeah, get over it. Get used to it. It's hard,
yeah. And so when you start hiking with these women and like you make them slow down, that's the first thing you have to do is make them slow down, because we're not in a race and we don't care, and stop and take a picture and do this and do this. You can see them go from being vulnerable and unsure to having fun, and at the end going, oh yeah, I can do this. It's the greatest gift that Trail Dames gives to all of our members, is that we get to see each other, we get to experience that ourselves, and we get to see the women around us experiencing it on every hike.
I'm sure, and everybody, I presume, is encouraging to everybody else, because that's what a group's all about, isn't it? Really?
Absolutely. Sometimes we joke that we're a connection club that actually just goes hiking, but we connect with each other, we look out for each other, and that's number one. We say no dame left behind ever.
Please tell me that when you all get to the top, you all do the dance of the real woman together.
Most of the time we do.
That must be great to see.
And there's a couple of videos you can see online, but I have to tell you, I learned a really important lesson from my friend Hiker Biker Babe, because at one point I teased her. She never would do the dance of the real woman. And I teased her and I went, one day we're going to get to where you're comfortable doing the dance of the real woman. And she looked at me, she says, and one day we're going to get you, Anna, comfortable knowing that we all have our way of dancing and it doesn't have to be your way. And I thought, oh gosh, she's totally right.
Ooh, yes.
If somebody doesn't want to throw their arms up in the air and yell, they certainly don't have to.
That's funny.
We all dance in our own way.
Now, I know you're not just locally based where you are you? I mean,
no.
You've spread out from the original idea. How does that work out?
Well, it's worked out great. I think we have 18 or 19 chapters now. They come and they go, and we're always in a state of building a chapter, or if a chapter has lost its leader, maybe closing that chapter. But we're all over the place. Right now we're mostly East Coast and Midwest. So right now,
how many members do you have then? How many members do you have?
Oh gosh, if I talk in terms of eyeballs, about 7,500 right now, I think.
Wow.
So yeah,
that is extraordinary. And how can women get
involved? Certainly not all active, but
how can women get involved in Trail Dames if they'd like to get involved, if they haven't heard of it already?
They can do several things. You can go to traildames.com, go to our website, and that will tell you if there's a chapter in your area. It will tell you how to open or start a chapter if you're interested, and give you contact information for all of us. You can also go to Facebook and join our Facebook group. On that, you don't have to be near a chapter. You don't have to officially join Trail Dames, but we're a supportive online community. You can ask questions, and we celebrate each other, and all women are welcome there.
So what do you see as if the leader of the word, I'm not sure, I suppose you're the leader of the Trail Dames end. What is the future for Trail Dames as you see it?
Well, the future, we want to take over the world one trail at a time.
And I've no doubt you will, Anna, I'll tell you. I've no doubt.
I just want, first of all, I want chapters all over the world. I dream of, in 100 years when I'm gone, I just don't want women anywhere that would like the opportunity to be a part of it, not to be able to be a part of it, if that makes sense. So,
Of course it does,
yeah, we just want to spread all over the world. And, the great thing I have to tell you, when I started Trail Dames, there was nothing. We said we were the first nationwide women's hiking club, which was true back then. The great thing is that is so no longer true. There's actually a bunch of them. And women in general, we're having more and more and more opportunities to join groups and hike together. And that makes me so happy. I feel like Trail Dames got to be a part of building that in the beginning and being part of those early adapters. It makes me so happy.
I'm sure it does. I tell you should be so darn proud, because you had something that happened to you and you wanted to share that with other women, which I think is a very commendable thing, an amazing thing that you've done. And building up to 7,500 people, you've brought people out onto the trail who would never have been there. And I keep saying this is about accessibility and getting people to convince them that just stepping on that trail, once they're there, is just a wonderful place to be. So good on you for getting, making the effort to get this group of people together and just inspiring them to get out there.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It has been, and it still is every day, the hardest job of my life and the greatest joy.
That's lovely. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. I think it's lovely, and I'm sure you're going to get a bit of a bump in membership as well, which is even better.
Well, that's wonderful. Can I say one more thing before we go?
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
That is that in part of our creating this Trail Dames world, we also created the first women's hiking and backpacking conference that existed. And every other year we have the summit. And this coming summer, we have a summit happening in Western North Carolina in Cullowhee. Right. It's a 3-day, 2-night women's hiking and backpacking conference. And it's for active hikers and backpackers, beginners, armchair dreamers. Anybody who is touched and moved by the outdoors is welcome to come. And your listeners can find information at thetraildamessummit.com.
Right. I'm going to put that link in the show notes as well. Well, thanks for talking to us. I really do appreciate it. And I once again, I think it's a wonderful thing that you've done, and good for you.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for your podcast and the opportunity to talk.
All right. Take it easy. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Don't you just love the spirit behind the dance of the real woman? These ladies, who maybe never expected to be able to climb a mountain or hike any real distance, they find themselves empowered by the support of like-minded women, and they celebrate their successes with the dance of the real woman. Man, that is such a positive message about celebrating life's victories. And Trail Dames, what a concept. What a simple idea. As Anna said, it wasn't about diet. It was about, come climb a mountain. I know that I bang on a bit how accessible hiking is. Well, Anna's really proven beyond anything I could ever say. The hiking truly is for everybody. It's just a case of taking that first step. Anna's a pioneer, no doubt about it. I hope that her story inspires you all to rethink what you can and you can't do. There are going to be several links in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about Anna and her trailblazing female friends. Now, here's a guy who wrote to me a few weeks back about the Vermont Long Trail. Curtis Tavares did the Long Trail over 2 sections, and I must say that it sounds a great way to spend a month or so, either in preparation for a longer through hike or simply just for the beauty of the hike itself. Here is Curtis Tavares with the Vermont Long Trail. Right, I'd like to introduce Curtis Tavares, who answered the call for information about other trails, and I'm delighted to say that Curtis is going to talk to us about the Vermont Long Trail. Hi Curtis, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. Now, I know you sent me an email, and we went back and forth, and I know that your lofty goal is to actually hike the AT when you're 54, which is another 10 more years, because your daughter has got to get off the payroll by leaving college, I guess, or going into college.
That's right.
Right. So you've done the whole of the Long Trail in a couple of sections. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yes, absolutely. So the Long Trail is 273 miles from the Massachusetts border to the Canadian border.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like 1/12 of the AT.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
The southern It is. Roughly the southern 130, 140 miles is pretty easygoing. Is challenging, but it's you pass through a lot of beaver dams and lower mountains, and then after you hit about mile 150, the last 100 miles is much more dramatic, much more remote.
Oh,
And
really?
there were days that I would only see maybe 8 or 10 people in the whole course of the day. Spent many nights by myself in the shelters or, in my hammock.
Did you like the solitude of that?
I did very much. And the reason I decided to do it in over 2 years was obviously it's difficult with a young family, it's difficult to leave home for 6 months. So, but 2 weeks was reasonable to do.
Yes, yeah.
And over the course of 2 weeks, it gives you the opportunity to kind of feel like you're really in the woods and part of it.
Yeah, I know the Appalachian Trail. They split up. It's somewhere after. I think it's the Long Trail, isn't it? Somewhere around there.
Yes, it's just behind there at Main Junction.
Yes.
Off to the east, the Appalachian Trail goes, and the Long Trail heads north.
And you say it gets tougher as it goes on. Then
It does. Once you pass one of the roads called Lincoln Gap,
right.
the terrain becomes much more challenging in terms of steeper rock faces. And then further north from that, there were times where I was using the rocks in the tree roots to climb up the faces of the rocks.
I used to love doing that. We did that a few times, I think, as well. And that was lovely. I used to think that was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you throw in mud, and it's raining, and it's windy, and that's why I think this is, for anyone out there that's considering the AT and they really want to do a shakedown, it's a brilliant trail.
Isn't it quite a tough preparation?
I was fortunate in the sense that I'm from New England originally, so I did have family in Massachusetts to get me to and from the trail.
Cool.
But there are, the road crossings are pretty central in terms of, I met a guy from Louisiana who actually parked at the Long Trail, hiked south, and then hitchhiked back up to Route 4, and then carried on north and hitchhiked back down. So it's in that regard, it's fairly accessible. Hitchhiking was never a problem.
Do they have the same system of shelters the way they do on the AT? And does that continue up the Long Trail as well?
It does. And the further north you go, you end up with enclosed lodges as well.
Ooh.
There are many more like log cabins. Yeah, exactly.
There's a treat.
It was, absolutely, especially on a windy and rainy night. It was oftentimes, especially if I was by myself, I would just set my hammock up inside the shelter.
Yeah, nice.
And kind of treat myself out of the weather.
But that solitude, that's something that I think people do have to get used to, don't they? And I'm not sure I would have liked as much solitude as that. Did you ever go a day or two without seeing anybody at all?
No, not entirely without.
All right. That's not too bad then. Yeah,
there was, I'd say in the total of the trip it took me 24 days in total, obviously divided up over the 2 years.
That's a pretty good rate.
Yeah. And that's including my 0 days. I think in total, I took 4 0 days out of that. And what I'd like to add is that in terms of actually training for the ATs, I still had to I did some mail drops. Right. Still did, having to go into town to resupply, do my laundry. And I think that was the good thing about taking 2 weeks to do it.
Yes, yeah.
Is you get a real feel for what the whole experience will be like, just obviously on a grander scale on the AT.
Do the roads cross the Long Trail in the same way they do further south when it's part of the Appalachian Trail?
I believe so. Some roads that you cross are major roads, so you're not too far off from a town center. One thing I learned is that post offices don't maybe open, but the desks aren't open.
Oh, gosh.
So that's something I learned the hard way.
I think every hiker's got a story when they turned up and the post office wasn't open and it said it would be. Oh, a nightmare.
Right.
Oh, dear. And there's not much you could do about it, is there really? If it's going to be open the next day, you've just got to stay there, haven't you? As simple as that.
That's right. That's
I was
right.
interested, actually. You said that you started the first year with a 32-pound pack, and yet the second go-round, you'd removed 11 pounds from that. What on earth did you take out?
So this, I went onto YouTube and I learned how to sew.
Oh, dear, nice.
And so my hammock, the first year, my hammock came in at almost 2 pounds.
Right.
And my underquilt was quite heavy. And so, I went onto YouTube and learned how to sew and sourced some materials online and ended up making a hammock that weighed slightly over 1 pound with my suspension.
Wow.
And took significant weight off my underquilt. Things like my sleeping pad that I brought just in case the first time, I left at home. I never used my camp shoes, so I took those out.
Right.
And so, anything that I found that I didn't use the first time around, I was just ruthless, and it didn't earn its way into my pack.
Isn't that interesting? I'll tell you why I think that is, because when you do this, you are taking literally everything you need on your back. And the fact that you could literally remove a third of that, just over a third of that, is quite an indication that we don't need that much to survive, do we?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And how did the hammock work? Did it work out well for you, your homemade hammock?
Yes, I love my hammock. Sometimes I'll use it here to sleep outside. It's really that comfortable to me.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was always grateful. And I was always grateful that, like, on some of those nights where it was raining torrentially, the water would be flowing underneath my hammock, and the fact that I was up off the ground was a good feeling that I couldn't get wet.
And you said in your email that you actually started training for your July hike. You started training in the September before. Did you find you were really ready for it physically when you got there then?
I was. And that was because, as you've experienced, getting your hiker legs definitely takes time.
About 200 miles from me.
It
was terrible. It was terrible.
But I was able to, when I had made my schedule, I had 10 miles scheduled for the first day, and then going to 12 miles. And on my first day, I ended up knocking out 12 and a half miles, and then moved on to a 16-mile day, and then on to a 20-mile day.
Oh, my gosh.
And I just felt ready to go. And I think because I had such a shorter window of time, I wanted to make it count while I was there.
Yeah. When is a good time to go then? Is that the advised time, July time?
To me, yes, because the black fly, I used to live in Vermont years and years ago.
All right.
And the black fly season is brutal. They are nasty little things. And by July, they're pretty much all gone.
Did you do July both times?
I did. Yes, I did. Yep.
You didn't really see the colours of autumn then, I suppose, did you? Unfortunately.
I did. I've already discussed with my wife that I'd like to go back someday and do that.
Good line.
I think
excellent.
That'd be fantastic.
How well did that go? Very good. I like that.
It's negotiable.
Yeah. Would you consider hiking? Is it the sort of trail you think a new hiker could do, or is this really a bit upscale a bit?
I think it's perfect as long as you, I would recommend going from south to north if you don't have as much experience. This past summer, I actually took my nephew who had just graduated high school, and we did a 60-mile section in the south, and it worked out great for him. As long as you stay, that section around Route 4 where the Long Trail is in south is good terrain to build yourself up on.
But all of that is also the Appalachian Trail, isn't it?
That's correct. That's right.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So when you spoke to him about it, did you say, would you want to come and hike on the Long Trail, or did you say, do you want to come and hike on the Appalachian Trail? Because they're the same thing, aren't they, in that case?
Yeah, I actually said the Long Trail. I was because that was what was prominent in my head. It was that's what came to the front.
So those, you're saying north of where it cuts off, it gets steeper, and does it get muddier as well? Because I seem to remember Vermont being very muddy when I went through it.
Honestly, you cannot escape the mud in that state. I was hiking with a guy one day, and his leg went so deep, and his foot came out, and his shoe was still in the mud pit. So it's.
Oh dear, that's
and
not
he was
good.
covered up to his knee in mud.
Oh dear, that's not good, is it? Did you stay at the inn at Long Trail when you were hiking, or did you stay out of towns most of the time?
No, I did stay at the inn at Long Trail.
Great pub there, great burgers, beers. I mean, how bad can it be?
Oh,
just what you need.
That's right. The whole atmosphere is wonderful.
Yeah, fantastic. If you wanted to do it in one shot, which is the full 273 miles, that time you left then, July time, is a pretty good time to do it, because you could probably do it in a couple of months, I suspect, maybe less than a couple of months.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they say on average on the GMC website, 20 to 30 days, depending on your pace.
Nice, very nice too.
And I would attest to that would be a very reasonable time to do it in if you were covering around 12 miles a day.
Cool. Very nice. Well, thanks very much for writing to me and telling me about it. I mean, I'd heard about the Long Trail, and obviously I'd been on it. And I find it fascinating that you regard it as the Long Trail when most of the people I went with obviously regard it as the Appalachian Trail. And I didn't really know what it was like north of that. And I would think it must be rather nice to start, if you start that as a hike, you know, you can really get warmed up with the southern section. That will get you ready for that northern section, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's how I would do it if I were to do it again.
I can certainly see why, yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much for calling us and telling us about it, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. Hopefully you're going to get your chance to do the AT fully at one stage in the future.
I do hope so, too.
Okay.
Thank
all right,
you,
mate.
Steve.
Well, thanks for talking. All the best. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Doesn't that sound great? As he mentioned, the AT and the Long Trail share some of the same real estate. And I remember being on that part of the trail. By then it was all tough to me, though. He said it got tougher. Well, to be fair, I hadn't hit New Hampshire yet, so I was soon to find out what tough really was as well. Yukon Caboose left us a 5-star review this week, titling it Awesome Info for AT Hikers. He says that he listens to a variety of podcasts, and this is by far the one I most look forward to listening to each week. Thanks, Caboose. Next week, we have a guest I've been hoping to speak with for some time, though the fault that she hasn't been on before is entirely my fault. Laurie Pottiger of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy was recorded a few weeks ago, but I screwed up the recording, so Laurie graciously agreed to do it again. As I have the memory of a guppy in a fishbowl, the interview second time round for me is going to be just as fresh as it was the first time round. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Laurie once more. Just before I sign off, make sure that you check out our sponsors site at trailtopia.com, where you're going to find some delicious meals to take with you on your next hike. I'm reading the complete chapter 10 of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer this week. It's not a super long chapter, probably because Earl is constantly getting soaked in this one, and his morale sinks to the lowest point of the trek, or the long cruise. I'll see you next week. Chapter 10, Curtains of the Sky. No mighty peaks, yet picturesque, with unexpected hills, a charming backyard wilderness that adequately fills trail time with tinkling waterfalls and tall cathedral pines, white birch and broken boulder walls, and honeysuckle vines. Cobble Mountain provides a far-reaching view across the Hudson Valley to the Catskills. These mountains, like the Poconos, were once a favourite dwelling place of the Indians and were known to them as Curtains of the Sky. After crossing Cobble Mountain, the trail descended steeply over ledges and rocks and followed the Housatonic River for several miles. Coming unexpectedly into one small clearing on the riverbank, I surprised a large bald eagle sitting on a rock in the river. It took wing instantly and soared away above the treetops. This was the only bald eagle definitely identified during the long cruise. Our national bird is a vanishing species, unable to live with civilization. The same might be said of the Mohicans, an Indian tribe immortalized by James Fenimore Cooper. Centuries ago they had a village along the Housatonic. Near Cornwall Bridge, a man stopped along the road to offer a ride. He had the appearance of a person equally at ease in a board of directors meeting or on a wilderness trip. When told of my trek, he wistfully declared he would like to join me the rest of the way, but couldn't. At the grocery store in the village, the choice of food was typical of New England. I even got some Boston brown bread. Beyond town, the trail turned up a beautiful ravine under towering hemlocks, often along the brink of a miniature gorge where little waterfalls fell or cascaded over mossy rocks into clear, deep pools. The canopy was so dense that only stray bits of pure sunlight got through. This was Dark Entry, one of the beauty spots along the Appalachian Trail. Beyond was a plateau region of broken terrain with giant boulders next to tiny grass plots and clumps of white birch, silver maple and other colourful trees. Sometimes the trailblazers were painted on black spots painted on white trees. Then the trail turned on roads for a while before coming to Cathedral Pines. This grove of trees reminded me of the Smokies, many of them towering at least 100 feet. One giant sits directly on top of a boulder, about 6 feet from the ground, and with roots reaching down on all sides. About sundown, I came along the edge of a game refuge and through abandoned farms to the pinnacle on Clark's Hill, reaching the road on the top at twilight. Just then a voice startled me, coming from a young couple who was strolling and had thought I was someone they knew. The man had been on Katahdin, which he called the greatest mountain in the world. One of his friends had reached the summit on skis, one of the few who ever had. He had intended trying to go all the way on the Appalachian Trail himself, but had given up the idea. I suspected that the reason was with him right then. The young lady didn't seem interested in such things. Their car was parked nearby. I moved along and soon stopped to sleep under some pines. Soon after starting in the morning, I came to a nice lean-to and stopped for breakfast, then came to another an hour later. Many white birches were at trailside as I went through an area of summer colonies such as Yelping Hill and Music Mountain. Nearby is Dean Ravine, a favourite with artists from the camps, with waterfalls that rivaled those in Dark Entry. The trail followed a brook to a road, then up a rocky ledge and back to the road again before reaching Falls Village. This was typical of the route through Connecticut, a sort of backyard wilderness. Some more of this included one big black dog that came with hackles rising. Fortunately, the owner was near and called it off. Then the road dwindled to a tote road and a sign saying, "Remember Bar Harbor," and finally a lumber camp. Beyond was more broken terrain, with fissures as though from a subterranean collapse. Dark was nearby now, but the place was gloomy. I kept on until forced to stop at the best spot in a swampy area. It was one of those long, long nights. More murky weather and overgrown trail greeted me in the morning. As a last resort, I started singing to cheer myself up. If anyone had heard, he surely would have thought a lunatic had escaped somewhere. At a road crossing near Salisbury, I turned aside to get supplies. Rainfall was heavier than ever as I stood under an awning in front of a store, mustering the courage to face the downpour. The proprietor of an adjoining barroom came out to scan the weather and remarked that the Louis Walcott fight would probably be postponed. This didn't register for a moment. Prize fighting was not important just then. The rain didn't ease, so I stuck my head through the poncho, put on the rain hat and started off in the same dogged way a punchy fighter goes out for another round. Morale was at low ebb, lowest of the trek. The rain kept on, and so did I, coming through brush and grassland to a solitary house beyond a barbed wire fence. Where the trail went I didn't know and scarcely cared. I flopped down and was crawling under the fence when a voice came from the doorway, telling me the gate was to my right. Being halfway, I kept on crawling. The man insisted I come into the house, despite my soggy condition. He and his wife began to feed me coffee and cookies. He had been in the Pacific too, in the Marines, and on some of the same islands as I. He knew a bit about hardship himself. My spirits began to rise. No one could have been more hospitable than they, or as understanding. They didn't even tell me I was crazy, to which I would have readily agreed. My recollection of crossing Bear Mountain, highest peak in Connecticut at 2335 feet, is vague, but I must have signed the register because people have written about it. Visibility was practically minus. Sage's Ravine is said to be beautiful, but I didn't notice. Sometime, somewhere, I crossed into Massachusetts, home state of Benton Mackay, and finally stopped for the night on a ledge behind some rocks. A poncho shelter and a drying and warming fire did help, and the rain stopped during the night. At dawn, the skies cleared completely, and the clouds dropped into the valleys. Mount Everett was close ahead, while Bear Mountain, with its stone monument on the summit, towered on the back trail. Someone has said that if you don't like the weather in the Appalachians, just wait a while and it will change. This time it had taken pretty long. My clothing and gear were almost dry by the time I reached the tower on Everett. A young couple came up the trail, said they had cheated by driving as close as they could. The good weather held during most of the way along the ridge, but lightning and thunder announced the approach of another storm as I scrambled down the end of the ridge near South Egremont and hugged the trunk of a dense-limbed tree. The downpour lasted at least an hour, while a swarm of mosquitoes did their best to profit from the situation. As I started off, a station wagon with siren wailing came skidding and roaring from the rear. Surely there was a lightning fire somewhere, but the vehicle was parked by a house farther along. The driver probably was just having fun or was in a hurry to get home. Clouds were racing overhead as I came to a point where a sign indicated a valley crossing eastward. But marking in that direction was lacking, and I finally knocked on the door to get directions. The door opened and a husky young man wearing marine fatigues looked at me. When asked about the trail, he said that explained the white marks he had seen on posts and trees, that it followed the Bow Wow Road, pointing to a sign at the intersection. Originally it was the Pow Wow Road because Indians once held councils there, but later residents thought the name was silly and changed it. As I was about to turn away, he invited me to dinner, adding with a laugh, "That is if you don't mind hash." He and his wife were a handsome couple, dark-haired and dark-eyed. His name was Louis Mazarel, and his family lived in Maine. They were timbermen, and he was a power saw operator for a lumber company based in Sheffield. Hash actually was on the menu, but garnished with onions and really very tasty. Before I left, Lou declared I needed more clothing and insisted on giving me an old combat shirt he said he would never need. It proved very useful farther north when cold weather set in. At the main road north of Sheffield, I hid the pack and headed for town, but had trouble getting a ride and got there after the stores were closed. Getting back was just as bad, and dark caught me as I stumbled on past a reservoir and finally stopped under some towering pines. Rain was resuming, and necessity resulted in another of my unorthodox arrangements. Setting the pack on a thatch of pine needles, I laid the poncho with the neck opening over the top of the pack and covered the opening with my rain hat. Then I huddled underneath, next to the pack. In a pinch, this is much better than no shelter at all. Next day, conditions became almost unbearable. The trail followed an abandoned railroad bed across a plateau region where brooks had overflowed and were flowing down the trail, forcing me to wade knee-deep in muddy water. Singing "River Stay Away From My Door" didn't influence the elements, but did tickle my sense of humour. Near Great Barrington, a friendly old man came along on a 2-horse wagon, bound for his woodlot for a load of poles. He said that the area had once been prosperous farmlands and that some foundations of houses and barns could still be found. He didn't seem to mind the miserable weather. Beyond town, the trail entered Beartown State Forest and passed several lakes. Water level at Benedict Pond was so high that the trail was flooded. The sky cleared as I reached Tyringham and stopped at the general store to mail cards and get supplies. My bed that night was under hemlocks on a ridge without rain. Morning weather was fair and I was making good time past Yoakum Pond when 2 men came round a bend clearing trail. One was cutting limbs with a long-handled shears and throwing them aside, while the other was swinging a weeder. They were members of the Medawampie Club, outing club of the University of Massachusetts faculty. They told me that 2 others were ahead, one of them John Vondel, president of the New England Trail Conference, vice president of the Green Mountain Club, president of the Medawampie Club, and member of the board of managers of the Appalachian Trail Conference. Yet he somehow managed to be a university professor, the only job that paid anything. At noontime, I stopped by a brook to cook in my usual fashion. First, a spot was cleared of litter and duff. Dead twigs were gathered and laid to one side. A kettle of water was set on the other side and the pack was used for a backrest. Corn cake was baking in the pan and soup was simmering in the kettle when the other 2 men came busily down the trail. The second stopped suddenly, looked over and said, "Aha, I thought I smelled a smudge." It was John Vondel, a key figure in the trail project in New England. When told of the long cruise, he smiled broadly and declared, "This is one man we're going to talk with." They remained nearly an hour. He mentioned the missing link, the section between the Green Mountains in Vermont and the White Mountains in New Hampshire, which had been wrecked by a hurricane 10 years before. He hadn't had time to reopen it yet and hoped I could get through. I assured him it couldn't be any worse than some sections in the south. He and his co-workers, volunteering time and effort to build and maintain the Appalachian Trail, were typical of the trail people, that incredible clan of thousands that made the dream of Benton Mackay come true. I am proud to be one of them. Insects, especially gnats, were pesky that afternoon. They danced by the dozens in front of my eyes, trying desperately to enter and drown in the resulting tears. I swatted lots of them, knocking them myself silly, but others replaced those that went west. The netting had long since worn out. At Dalton I tried to replace it, but couldn't find any. I would have sidetracked to Pittsfield, but a man at the bus stop said the stores would be closed by the time the bus got there. So I bought supplies in Dalton and moved along a mile or two before stopping to sleep at Trailside. Beautiful, no rain. At Cheshire, I paused to examine the memorial to Elder John Leland, eulogised on the plaque as eloquent preacher, beloved pastor, influential patriot, and father of religious liberty. Also recorded was the fact that he helped elect President Jefferson and later presented the president, in the presence of assembled dignitaries, with the Big Cheshire Cheese, weighing 1,235 pounds. West of Cheshire is Hancock, once a Shaker community. This religious sect was known for its celibacy and for distinctive furniture and other handcrafted items. From Cheshire, the trail ascended the Greylock Range, where I stopped to sleep at the lean-to on Saddle Ball, in the dry for a change. Rain came at night and continued as far as the summit of Mount Greylock, the highest peak in Massachusetts at 3,491 feet elevation. The memorial there honours the sons and daughters of the state who served in wartime. A spiral stairway gives access to observation windows at the top. Several carloads of visitors arrived, and the children of one family trooped up the stairs and shouted to their mother who had stayed below. Clouds were settling into surrounding valleys so that peaks barely showed. Occasionally a rift would show the adjacent lowlands. Into these go many ski runs, including the Thunderbolt for experts only. North of Greylock, the trail follows ski trails for miles, with marking alternating between circular insignia and the standard blaze. Bugs, meanwhile, were as bad as ever, and my first action at Blankenton was to get netting. None of the stores had any, so I caught a bus to North Adams and was able once again to get some in a department store. After eating at a diner and mailing some cards, I caught a return bus to Blankenton, arriving as a violent storm was breaking. While waiting under an awning in front of a grocery store, I talked with an ageing baseball player who probably never did much else. He could describe in detail every game in which he had ever played. A few miles north of Blankenton is the state line of Vermont and the beginning of the Long Trail, which extends all the way to Canada. The Appalachian Trail follows it as far as Sherburne Pass before turning eastward. Behind me now was the low-lying central part of the Appalachian mountain system, passing close to large population centres, yet surprisingly wild and interesting. It is there that the greatest effort is necessary to preserve what is left of the wilderness along the trail. The encroachment that once seemed overwhelming must be stopped if the Appalachian Trail is to survive. Benton Mackay once told me he had believed a trail, like a chain, was no better than its weakest link, but had changed his mind. The best way was to strengthen the weak links as much as possible. The long cruise was now entering the higher, more rugged section of trailway, the counterpart of the Southern Highlands, with extensive national forests, timberline peaks and ridges instead of the boards of the South, the Presidential Range instead of the Smokies, and Katahdin instead of Oglethorpe.